Theos. He had hold of your soul from a long time back, seems like. You get what you needed from him? Well, those can be hard to come by. But maybe that's best. Forces you to find your own footing. You'll be feeling better soon, then. Good. That's real good. You got it figured out what you're going to do about all that? Got a lot of people out there thinking they've been abandoned by their gods. There's not much that'll put the fear in you more than that. You can take my word for it. If it was in my power, and I know it's not, but if it was, I'd find a way to give them the courage to face it. Not because they think there's some god looking out for them, but because they've just got it in them. And after what you've been through, though, I'm sure you got your own ideas. Better make it good. Hey.
So much for Theos, then. Now you have a chance to set things right, back to the proper order of things. It will take the Dyrwood generations to recover, but at least these souls will find their way back to the wheel, as it should be.
Ah, the end of the road greets us at last. You fared well, Watcher. Better than any Watcher has right to. Seems you were afield in need of a flame's cleansing. Would that my own trial had produced such an outcome. I had figured myself for the field all this time. But you were the field, and I the darkness. A lesson neither of Durance nor of Margarin. But with that trial's end, a new one begins. A god's trial. And I will stand in judgment without mercy.
We've come to the end of it, my friend. It has been an honor to walk this road with you, and I will regret our parting.
Astounding. I always knew the Leaden Key stood for something big, but I didn't quite realize what I'd gotten myself into. And now, you're in the middle of something even bigger. With a decision that will affect millions. This is beyond either of us. The certainty of the gods is a mercy. Power like this is a heavy burden. Just look at how it crushed Theos. Perhaps he was right to surrender it to Woedica. It's your decision, of course. And whatever you decide, I'm glad our paths crossed in Gilded Vale. Hey.
You once grew fat while others spent the currency of their lives in your service. I would gladly rend your back with the lash, taking interest for every drop of blood you spilt, every scrap of flesh you scarred. But my mistress would appeal to your sense of perspective, for you know that all things have their place. You have labored at the pleasure of others. That shriveled hag in Hadrit House. Those preening soldiers with more taste for silk than steel. The wretched tribesmen playing out their fantasies of grandeur. And then you cowered and knelt before the gods themselves, begging one paltry favor and receiving riddles and visions in response. And now the gods give you orders and commands, even while you set out to fix what they cannot. Yet what have they offered you? The exiled queen is not an ungrateful patron. Finish the work Theos began. Strengthen Woodica with these souls and allow her to become the most powerful of all the gods, with you as her favored. Yes, consider well the prosperous lives and the power that awaits you. I'm certain you'll choose well.
Hey.
At your command, the ancient device became your instrument, spinning to life with deafening resonance and gathering up the swirling essence like thread on a great spindle. There, in the pale, pulsing glow of the machine that set you on this path long ago, you summoned all your strength, focusing on your objective and blocking out all else. With a single concussive blast that rocked the chamber and sent you tumbling to the ground, you freed the souls from their stasis. Exhausted, your consciousness slipping away, your last sight was of the machine, dark and dormant. Then your eyes closed, and sleep welcomed you at long last. After coming to and searching for some time, you discovered the route Theos used to enter Sun and Shadow, and embarked on a long and arduous ascent back to the surface. You emerged in Ter Evron after days of tunneling through the rubble Theos had left behind, and when you stepped into the daylight, you were faced with a different Dyrwood than the one you had left. At your direction, the essence gathered in Sun and Shadow was sent across Dyrwood to meld with and galvanize the souls of its people. In the days that followed, Dyrwoodans, confronting adversity and expecting to be at the mercy of their own weakness, instead found strength and the will to persevere. The aggrieved found themselves able to carry on after their losses. The desperate found new reasons to hope. And the new reasons to hope were many, for Waidwen's legacy had come to an end after 15 years. Hollow births ceased in the Dyrwood, and a country that only days ago had seemed on the brink of collapse was suddenly on the path to a recovery. A fitter, more resilient country in the preferred image of the god of the hunt. Lord Radric's zeal had brought him back to life once, but it would not do so again. Radric's destruction at your hands spelled the end of his suffocating rule over Gilded Vale and the surrounding area. In his absence, the village prospered, becoming a popular destination for new settlers anxious to leave Defiance Bay after the riots. Without a nearby ruler, it also grew more wild, with many settlers moving on as soon as they'd arrived, turned off by lawlessness that was excessive even by Dyrwoodan standards. Nevertheless, despite the challenges of living there, Gilded Vale had survived, and would continue to survive for the foreseeable future. Following the assassinations of Duke Avar Wolfgren and Lady Webb, Defiance Bay was thrown into political upheaval. In the ensuing weeks, the streets had become the domain of looters and blackguards. Few dared to step outside their own doors alone or unarmed. But order was soon re-established by the Knights of the Crucible, who, despite their depleted numbers, had gained favor in the public eye for their role in the unraveling of the conspiracy surrounding Wydwin's legacy, and were quickly reinforced by returning forces from Fleetbreaker Castle. For the Knights, their resurgence marked a return to the tradition as well. Having seen firsthand the dangers presented by dabblers in animancy, the Order quickly abolished the practice internally, preferring the familiarity of their hammers and forges to the uncertainties of Essence and Adra. Their identity rediscovered, the Knights suppressed their political aspirations and began once again to train their recruits in the art of blacksmithing, recapturing the post-revolutionary ideals of Dyrwood and regaining the respect of its citizens as a result. The destruction of the machine atop Ter Noaneth spelled the end of the reanimated corpses in Heritage Hill. Though at first few were willing to venture into the abandoned district, it was soon cleaned out and rebuilt. The district's horrors still fresh in people's minds, it would be some time before it was fully repopulated. But eventually the lure of cheap prime land would all but erase the memory. The Duke's assassination at the apparent hands of an animancer had caused catastrophic rioting in the streets of Defiance Bay. But those who had escaped the melee in the palace hearings remembered the testimonies of the strange guest who had shown up that day and absolved animancy, implicating the Leaden Key instead. The rumor spread quickly, and soon the popular belief was that the assassin had been a Leaden Key spy. When the legacy had lifted, people came to see it not as a sign that the riots had been according to the gods' wishes, as Theos had hoped, but as a confirmation that animancy had never been the source of the problem in the first place. Dyrwoodans instead convinced themselves that the riots had somehow purged Defiance Bay of Leaden Key spies, and that the end of Wydwin's legacy was their well-deserved reward. The rage against animancers was quickly forgotten, and those who had survived were permitted to return to Brackenberry Sanitarium and rebuild it so they might resume their studies. Abydon was restored but tempered, and the compromise that he and Andra sought played out in the Dyrwood too. Skilled labor saw a revival in the Dyrwood, and the country's architects, engineers, and masons transformed the broken nation into a modern marvel. Defiance Bay was rebuilt into a grand capital, and the roads that connected the country were paved into broad highways. On the other hand, expeditions to Engwithan ruins steadily declined, and the Dyrwood found a more stable, peaceful relationship with Eir Glanfath. With the Eyeless defeated, Stalwart redoubled its efforts to unlock the mysteries of Durgan Steel and create new marvels upon the White Forge. However, the villagers also realized that they would never achieve their ambitions on their own. To that end, they set aside their grievances and welcomed newcomers, Dyrwoodan and Raedsaren alike, to their town. Stalwart grew not only as a hub for mining and metalworking, but also as a trading outpost, which Durgan's battery stood ready to protect. With this newfound prosperity came a generation of peace. The Flames That Whisper clan found a cautious peace with Stalwart, particularly once the villagers heard of the aid the ogres had offered against the Eyeless. The clan moved back into the Russet Wood, and as Stalwart grew in prestige, the villagers formed a tighter alliance with their ogre neighbors. Within a generation, ogre traders visited Stalwart, and village hunters were welcome in the Russet Wood. Harmka's death had brought the Devil of Carrick little satisfaction. In time, her taste for vengeance soured. What replaced it was a hunger to feel something, anything, new. Summer had thinned the snowpack twice over when she felt the joint at her elbow first begin to stiffen. She turned her back on the hopes of animancy and civilization and walked east. She pushed through the mountains, past Raedceres, and into the broad plains of Ishamiddle.
She had forgotten what it was like to simply journey, no goal or destination in mind. Though she felt nothing more than the steady thump of her feet on the road, the endless horizons and grassy meadows were new to her. She measured her time in the gradual rusting of her body and was satisfied. Her movements slowed, but so did the world around her. Waist-high grasses undulated and tacked in the wind, as gradual as the tides. Sparrows and blackjays made steady pilgrimages across the sky, each flap of their wings a solemn salute. She could hardly move when she found something she had never seen before: the ocean. With the last of her strength, she pulled herself beneath the water, content at last to feel the movement of currents and the constant caress of the waves. Zawa came to understand that the time of the Tekkan had passed. With his soul no longer fettered to worldly concerns, he grew to become the enlightened Anitle his shaman had foreseen. He took up in an empty monastery near Cold Flow Lake, and word began to spread of his presence there. He taught pilgrims and students how to leave behind their vanity, their fear, and even their past. He invited those who studied with him to share their newfound knowledge, so that all might free themselves from suffering. Once Maneha had made peace with her memory, she decided the time had come to face her more recent past. For the first time in decades, she returned home to Rawatai, and she found that it had changed as much as she had. New districts had sprung up along the coast, while others withered into crumbling husks, and the streets had changed their course as surely as rivers. Her parents wept with joy at her return. They still ran the old spice shop, and in its many aromas and flavors, she found memories of the places she'd traveled and the people she'd known. She told her story, bottle by bottle, and began to build a life on the soil she knew best. The fortress of Cadnua emerged as a bastion of security in the midst of an untamed land, becoming the envy of every thane and earl in Dyrwood. Legend grew over time of its impregnability, and stories of formidable invaders easily scattered by the keep's defenses became popular around the hearths of Dyrwoodinians. Likewise, it also became a beacon to travelers, merchants, and visiting dignitaries alike. Reputed as the finest fortress in all Dyrwood, people would journey from near and distant lands alike to experience its fabled hospitality and grandeur. After the death of the master below, a strange quiet fell over the endless paths of Ardnua. The attacks on the fortress above ceased, Ardnua's silent titan the closest remaining thing to a master in its musty, forgotten passages. Pallegina had gone against the Duke's Bell's orders by inventing a new trade arrangement with the Anamenfoth to accommodate the recovering Dyrwooden market. With the Dyrwood's people strengthened by the Watcher's gift of souls, the Vailian republics found themselves struggling to keep up with their new competitors. For her outrageous insubordination and audacity, Pallegina was banished from the republics for several years. After the southern forest of Erglonfoth opened to both the republics and the Dyrwood, the Vailians found that the combined efforts of all three nations had created a robust trade network. The Duchessa of Biajepi granted Pallegina a pardon for her foresight, though it took many years for her to regain the trust of her superiors and brothers in the order. Haravius took his leave of the party and, after his first bath in years, returned to his nomadic lifestyle. With his homesickness expunged, he found renewed joy and tranquility in his wandering survey of the wilderness. For the first time in his life, he ventured beyond sight of the mountains of Erglonfoth. During his travels, he penned numerous journals and sketches detailing his travels through frozen tundra, searing desert, and tropical forests. Wherever he went, Haravius left behind stories of the Autumn Druid, a temperamental, one-eyed wise man of the forest, known to bring food to lost travelers and unusual advice to anyone willing to ask him a question. Adair chose not to return home to Gilded Vale. Still most comfortable far from cities, he settled in Dyrford, which, like many towns in the Dyrwood, was beginning the slow process of rebuilding. Believing now that it was the obligation of Kith to be the leaders their gods had not, Adair was soon named mayor of the town, and under his guidance, Dyrford soon began to prosper. He expelled the last of the Scanites from the area and drew new settlers with the offer of land, a trick he had learned from someone he otherwise preferred to forget. With each passing day, Dyrford would come to more closely resemble the gilded vale of Adair's childhood, the one worthy of its name. When the dust settled in sun and shadow, Aloth looked upon the remains of Theos Ix Arcanon, his former master. He saw where the Grandmaster had gone wrong, and he knew what he would do better. The secret of the gods would be preserved, and with it, the sanity and well-being of all Kith. He donned the remains of Theos's ceremonial garb and prepared himself for the long and lonely task ahead. With both their aims fulfilled, Kana Rua bid the Watcher farewell and sailed back to his beloved Rawatai. There, he reported on his findings to the Lore College. Kana spoke of the Engwithan people, describing both their vile experiments and their inspiring accomplishments. He spoke too of the destruction of the tablet by the Leaden Key, and the group's efforts to erase the Engwithan legacy from the world. Both inspiration and cautionary tales, he said, could be found in the world beyond Rawatai's borders. Kana urged his people to continue to pursue knowledge abroad, so that the lessons found there might benefit Tekoa. Kana's inability to prove his theory of Engwithan influence diminished his academic standing, but his passion drew much interest from those less concerned with degrees. Kana swiftly became an influential figure in the move toward a more collaborative approach to expansion on the northern continent. In his personal life, he came to enjoy the reputation of an affable eccentric, willing to share grand and impossible secrets, along with a drink and a song. With Theos defeated and the souls released from sun and shadow, healthy children were born once again in the Dyrwood. The grieving mother sought a place where she might do penance for the birthing bell. She returned to Dyrford, where, to the astonishment of the villagers, she delivered the first healthy child in over a decade. She remained there, and with each new birth, she saw a measure of hope restored to the Dyrwood and a measure of grace for her own troubled past. Durrance used Magrin's strength only until Theos had been cast from the world, and then swore off her influence entirely. Regret came to weigh heavily on his mind, and a man who had never previously lacked for words or opinions came to embrace silence and contemplation. He continued to wander, penniless and destitute, searching now not for the reason for his goddess's silence, but for a mechanism for revenge. The charred robes he continued to wear as a reminder that he had been burned by his goddess, and not just by the flames of the Godhammer. After 5 years of searching for Persak, Sagani's 4-month journey home felt longer still. The Dyrwood, Aer Glonfoth, the Valian republics became places on a map, endless expanses of green between her and Nasitok. Her homecoming was celebrated by all of Masuk, yet it was the reunion with Kalu and their children that truly brought her joy. She relinquished her role in the long hunts, and ever after, she and Itumak spent their days working in the village and their nights at her hearth. She watched her own children and their children grow and thrive. When she finally passed, she lay surrounded by the affection and tears of 5 generations. For you, the death of Theos brought an end to your waking visions and a silence to the whispers of the past. In their absence, you were able to sleep. The questions of a distant lifetime ceased to trouble your soul. All that remained was what to make of the answer. But at the moment, there was little to be done, and the matter would have to wait. A long journey loomed ahead, made no easier by your decision to bring an infant to Sun and Shadow.